My wife betrayed me, then started demanding $500,000, but I found out that my father was to blame for everything. I'm Jason, 37, and until last month, I thought my life was pretty solid. I'd been married to Amanda, 35, for 7 years. Sure, we had our ups and downs, like anyone else, but I never thought we'd end up here, divorced, and me completely blindsided. It all started on a random Tuesday. I was at work, dealing with some client calls, when I got a text from Amanda. "We need to talk tonight." My stomach dropped. I spent the rest of the day distracted, running through every possible scenario. I thought maybe she was upset about something trivial, me forgetting to take out the trash, or one of those disagreements about how much I was working lately. But when I got home, the look on her face told me this wasn't one of those small things. She sat me down in the living room, her arms crossed and her face set in this weird, almost rehearsed calm. I barely got a word out before she said, "Jason, I want a divorce." Just like that. No lead up, no explanation. I felt like someone had hit me in the chest with a sledgehammer. My first reaction was disbelief. "What are you talking about? Amanda, are you serious?" Her response was almost cold. "I've already filed. I've been thinking about this for months." Months? My mind raced. How could she have been thinking about this for months and not said a thing? We weren't perfect, but divorce? That was completely out of left field for me. "What do you mean, months?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We just went on vacation 2 months ago, and you said that was one of the best trips we've ever had." She shrugged, like it didn't matter. "That doesn't change anything. I've already spoken to a lawyer, and I think this is the best decision for both of us." Both of us? Who was she kidding? She'd made this decision entirely on her own. The next blow came when she mentioned the financial settlement. Amanda didn't want to drag things out in court, she said, so she was asking for $500,000 as a lump sum. Let me be clear. I'm not rich, but I'd built a decent nest egg over the years through hard work and some smart investments. $500,000 was a huge hit for me, but Amanda was adamant. "Take it or leave it," she said. "I don't want alimony. I just want this money so I can start over." Start over? She made it sound like she was the victim here, like she needed rescuing. But she was the one blowing up our life. I tried to negotiate, to understand why she was asking for so much, but she wouldn't budge. "Jason, I don't want to argue. I just want this to be over." I was furious, but I felt like I had no choice. Dragging this out in court could have cost me even more. After a sleepless night and some advice from my lawyer, I reluctantly agreed. A few weeks later, after Amanda moved out, I started noticing things that didn't add up. For one, she had been incredibly distant for months leading up to her bombshell. At the time, I chalked it up to stress from her job or just regular relationship ebb and flow. Now, it felt calculated. I also found some receipts and credit card statements she'd left behind. There were charges I couldn't explain. Expensive dinners at places I'd never heard of, purchases for designer clothes I never saw her wear, and even a hotel stay in the middle of the week. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than she was letting on. My suspicions grew when one of our mutual friends, Kelly, casually mentioned seeing Amanda out with a man I didn't know. When I pressed for details, Kelly got uncomfortable. "I don't want to get involved," she said. "But maybe you should talk to Amanda about it." By this point, Amanda was avoiding my calls and texts unless it was strictly about the divorce logistics. I finally decided to confront her directly. I called her and told her I needed answers. She sighed, clearly annoyed, but agreed to meet me for coffee. When I brought up the receipts and the man Kelly mentioned, she didn't even try to deny it. "Jason, this is why I wanted a clean break," she said, like she was the one being reasonable. "Yes, I've been seeing someone. It's been going on for a while. That's part of why I realized our marriage wasn't working." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So, all this time you've been lying to me? While I was working to provide for us, you were sneaking around with someone else?" Her face hardened. "I didn't plan for it to happen, Jason, but it did. And honestly, I'm happier now." Happier? She'd completely wrecked my life, and she was happier? I wanted to scream, but I held it together. "Who is he?" I asked. "His name is Mark," she said, almost casually. "He understands me in ways you never did." The divorce was finalized within a month. Amanda got her $500,000 and disappeared from my life, moving in with Mark almost immediately. I was left with a mix of anger, confusion, and sadness. 7 years of marriage, and it all ended like this. I'm still trying to make sense of it all, but one thing's clear. I'll never trust someone so blindly again. For now, I'm focusing on rebuilding, therapy, time with friends, and just taking it one day at a time. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm determined not to let Amanda's betrayal define me. It's been 2 years since Amanda and I finalized our divorce, and I've been doing everything I can to move forward. Therapy helped, my friends and family have been supportive, and I've slowly started to rebuild my life. But just when I thought I had finally put everything behind me, something happened that threw me for a loop. It all started with a call from my father, Henry. For some context, my dad and I have a decent relationship, though we're not what you'd call close. He's always been a bit stoic and distant, the kind of man who expresses love more through actions than words. During my marriage to Amanda, he was polite to her but never seemed particularly fond of her. He was supportive after the divorce, mainly because he could see how much it devastated me. When Henry called me last week, I thought it would be about our plans for Christmas. My sister, Kate, and her family were coming, and I had assumed it would just be a small gathering at Dad's house, as usual. "Hey, Dad," I answered casually, expecting a quick chat about logistics. "Jason, I wanted to let you know I've invited Amanda to join us for Christmas dinner," he said, his voice calm and matter-of-fact, like he was announcing the weather. At first, I thought I'd misheard him. "Wait, what? Did you just say Amanda? As in my ex-wife?" "Yes," he replied, still annoyingly composed. "Why the hell would you do that?" I asked, my voice rising. "She reached out to me recently," he said. "We've been talking. I thought it would be nice to have her join us." I was stunned into silence for a moment. Amanda and my dad? Talking? Why would Amanda reach out to him of all people? And why would he agree to invite her to Christmas? "Dad, this doesn't make any sense," I finally said. "You were never close to Amanda. Why would you even entertain this idea?" "She told me she regretted how things ended between the two of you," he said. "She wanted to apologize, and I thought it might be a chance for some closure." Closure? The word hit me like a slap. I didn't need closure. I needed distance. I tried to argue, but Dad wouldn't budge. "Jason, it's my house, and I've already invited her. You don't have to come if you don't want to." The conversation ended with me feeling more confused and angry than I'd been in years. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Why now? Amanda had never once tried to contact me after the divorce. Why would she suddenly reach out to my father, of all people? And why would he agree to involve her in our family's Christmas? When I told Kate about it, she was just as baffled. "That's so weird," she said. "Dad never even liked Amanda. Are you sure he's okay?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but I can't shake the feeling that there's more to this than he's telling me." On Christmas Eve, I decided I had to go. As much as I hated the idea of seeing Amanda again, I needed answers. When I arrived at Dad's house, Amanda was already there. She looked different. Her hair was shorter, and she was dressed more conservatively than I remembered. But what really struck me was her demeanor. She seemed nervous, almost timid, which was so unlike the confident, self-assured woman I'd known. "Jason," she said, giving me a tentative smile. "Amanda," I replied coldly, barely looking at her. Dinner was awkward, to say the least. Kate and her husband, Tom, kept exchanging confused glances, while Dad acted like everything was perfectly normal. Amanda tried to make small talk, but I wasn't having it. Finally, after dessert, I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled Amanda aside into the den. "Okay, what the hell is going on?" I demanded. She looked genuinely taken aback. "What do you mean?" "I mean, why are you here? Why did you reach out to my dad? What do you want?" She hesitated, looking down at her hands. "Jason, I know I hurt you, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I've been doing a lot of soul-searching these past couple of years. I realized I made some terrible mistakes, and I wanted to make amends." "Amends?" I scoffed. "You think showing up at my family's Christmas is the way to do that?" "I didn't plan for this," she said quickly. "Your dad has been kind enough to listen to me, and he thought this might help. Her words didn't sit right with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something she wasn't saying. After she left that night, I confronted Dad again. "What aren't you telling me?" I asked. He sighed, finally dropping his calm facade. "She came to me because she's in trouble, Jason. Financial trouble. She thought I could help her." I felt a wave of anger and disbelief. "Are you serious? She took $500,000 from me, and now she's asking you for more." "She didn't ask for money," Dad said. "She asked for advice. She's lost everything. Mark left her, and she made some bad investments. She's been trying to rebuild, but she's struggling." I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt a twisted sense of satisfaction at her downfall, but another part of me couldn't believe she'd have the audacity to involve my family in her mess. Over the next few weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something bigger. Amanda's sudden reappearance, my dad's willingness to help her. It all felt too strange, too coincidental. I still don't know what her true intentions are, but one thing's for sure: this isn't over. It was Christmas Day, and the uneasy vibe from the night before had only gotten stronger. I couldn't believe Amanda was still here. Not only that, but she seemed far too comfortable in my father's home. She was chatting with Kate in the kitchen, laughing like she'd been part of our family all along. I hung back, pretending to check my phone, but really, I was watching her. Something about the way she moved around the house didn't sit right with me. She didn't look like a guest. She looked like she belonged there, like she had every right to be standing at that counter making jokes with my sister. When Dad came into the room, my suspicions grew even more. He walked over to Amanda with an exaggerated warmth I'd never seen him show her before, even when we were married. "Amanda, do you need another drink? Are you comfortable? You're sure you're warm enough?" he asked, practically fussing over her. I couldn't believe my eyes. My father, the man who rarely even remembered to offer his own kids a drink, was acting like Amanda was royalty. "I'm fine, Henry," Amanda replied with a small smile. "You've been so thoughtful." "Thank you." Thoughtful? My dad? It was like I'd entered some alternate universe. As the day went on, things only got stranger. At one point, I walked into the den to grab a beer and found Amanda and Dad sitting on the couch, talking in hushed tones. They stopped abruptly when they saw me, both of them sitting up a little too straight, like kids caught sneaking cookies before dinner. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Nothing," Dad said quickly, standing up and brushing past me. "Just catching up." Catching up? That didn't make any sense. He'd never been close to Amanda, so what could they possibly have to catch up on? I sat down across from Amanda, staring at her until she finally looked at me. "What are you doing here, Amanda?" "Really?" I asked, keeping my voice low so no one else would hear. She sighed, leaning back against the couch. "Jason, I told you. I'm just trying to make amends. Your dad has been kind enough to give me a chance to do that." I didn't believe her for a second. "Why now? After 2 years of silence, why show up here?" "I've already explained," she said, her tone growing sharper. "Look, I know you don't trust me, and I don't blame you. But I'm not here to cause trouble." "You showing up is trouble," I snapped. "And you and my dad whispering like that doesn't help your case." Her eyes widened, and she sat up straighter. "We weren't whispering. Jason, you're being paranoid." I didn't respond, but I didn't stop staring at her, either. The tension between us must have been obvious, because Kate walked in a moment later, looking concerned. "Is everything okay in here?" she asked, glancing between us. "Fine," Amanda said quickly, standing up and brushing past me. "I'll go see if Henry needs help with anything." Kate waited until Amanda was gone before turning to me. "What was that about?" "I don't trust her," I said flatly, "and I don't trust Dad right now, either." "Something's going on." Kate frowned, sitting down beside me. "What do you mean?" I told her about the weird conversation I'd walked in on and how Dad had been acting so out of character. Kate didn't seem as surprised as I thought she'd be. "You know," she said slowly, "Dad's been acting a little strange for a while now. I just thought it was because he's getting older or maybe lonely, but now that you mention it, he has been talking about Amanda more lately." That caught my attention. "What do you mean?" "Just little things," she said with a shrug. "Like, a few weeks ago, he asked me if I'd heard from her. I thought it was weird at the time, but I didn't think much of it. I mean, why would he care about Amanda? Exactly, I said. Why would he care? And why would she care about reaching out to him? Kate didn't have an answer, and neither did I. That evening, after dinner, things escalated. We were all sitting in the living room, opening gifts. It should have been a happy, relaxed moment, but I couldn't focus on anything except Amanda and Dad. Amanda was sitting next to him on the couch, laughing at some joke he'd made. He handed her a gift, a small box wrapped neatly in silver paper. "What's this?" she asked, looking genuinely surprised. "Just a little something," Dad said, smiling. She opened it slowly, her face softening as she pulled out a delicate gold bracelet. "Henry, this is beautiful," she said, her voice almost trembling. "Nothing but the best for family," he replied, giving her a wink. Family? That was it. I couldn't stay quiet any longer. "Okay, what the hell is going on here?" I asked, standing up. Everyone froze. Amanda and Dad exchanged a quick glance before looking at me. "Jason, sit down," Dad said, his tone firm. "No," I said, my voice rising. "I'm done with this." "Amanda, why are you here? Why are you acting like we're all one big happy family? And Dad, why are you going out of your way to make her feel so special?" "Jason, you're being ridiculous," Amanda said, standing up as well. "Am I?" I shot back. "Because it sure looks like there's some kind of conspiracy going on here." "Enough," Dad said, his voice cutting through the tension. "Jason, we'll talk about this later. Not in front of everyone." "No, we'll talk about it now," I insisted. "Jason," Kate said, stepping between us. "Calm down. You're making a scene." "I don't care," I said, glaring at both Amanda and Dad. "Something's going on, and I'm going to find out what it is." Without waiting for a response, I stormed out of the room. I didn't have a plan, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let this go. The day after Christmas, I couldn't shake the tension from the previous night. Amanda's sudden closeness with my dad wasn't just odd. It was suspicious. The bracelet, the whispered conversations, the way they exchanged glances when I questioned them, it all felt wrong. I knew there was more to this than either of them was letting on, and I was determined to find out what. I decided to call Kate first. She had been the only one who seemed to notice something strange, even if she wasn't as vocal about it as I was. When I called, she answered on the second ring, her voice tight with concern. "Jason, are you okay?" she asked. "You were so upset last night." "I'm fine," I said quickly, "but I can't stop thinking about it. There's something going on between Dad and Amanda, and I need to figure out what it is." Kate hesitated. "Do you really think it's, I don't know, a conspiracy? I mean, I agree it's weird, but maybe there's a simpler explanation. If there is, they're sure going out of their way to hide it." I shot back. "I can't just let it go, Kate. I need answers." She sighed. "What are you going to do?" "Talk to Dad," I said firmly. "But first, I want to talk to Amanda. She's the key to all of this." I didn't wait for Kate to try and talk me out of it. I hung up and called Amanda. She didn't answer, so I left a curt voicemail. "Amanda, we need to talk. Call me back." I didn't expect her to respond, but to my surprise, she called back within an hour. Her tone was defensive from the start. "Jason, I don't know what more you want from me," she said. "I've already explained why I'm here." "No, you haven't," I said bluntly. "And I'm not buying your story. We need to meet. Today." She hesitated. "Fine, but only if you promise to keep your temper in check." We agreed to meet at a local coffee shop. When I arrived, Amanda was already there, sitting in a corner booth with her arms crossed. She looked tense but defiant, like she was ready for a fight. "Thanks for coming," I said, sliding into the seat across from her. "Let's just get this over with," she replied. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "What's going on between you and my dad?" She blinked, caught off guard by my directness. "Nothing is going on, Jason. We've just been talking." "About what?" I pressed. "And don't give me some vague excuse about making amends," she sighed, glancing around the room as if searching for an escape. "I didn't want to tell you this, but your dad approached me during the divorce." I leaned forward, my heart racing. "What do you mean?" Amanda hesitated, then finally said, "He offered me money to leave you." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What?" "It was right after I told you I wanted a divorce," she continued, her voice trembling. "Your dad called me and said he wanted to meet. I didn't know what to expect, but when I got there, he made it very clear that he thought our marriage was holding you back. He said you'd never reach your potential with me in your life." I stared at her, struggling to process what she was saying. "And you went along with it?" She nodded, looking ashamed. "Jason, I didn't have a choice. He didn't just offer me money, he threatened me. He said he could ruin my career, that he had connections who could make sure I'd never work again." I felt my anger rising. "So you took the money? How much?" 750,000, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own father had paid my wife to leave me, then threatened her to make sure she went through with it. The betrayal was almost too much to bear. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" I demanded. "Because I was scared," Amanda said. "And because I thought, maybe he was right. Maybe I was holding you back." I shook my head, my mind racing. This doesn't make any sense. Why would he go to such extremes? "Jason, your dad has always been controlling," she said. "He wanted what he thought was best for you, even if it meant destroying our marriage." I didn't want to believe her, but deep down, I knew it was true. My dad had always been a perfectionist, always pushing me to be better, to achieve more. But I never thought he'd stoop to something like this. I left the coffee shop without saying another word, my head spinning. I needed to confront my dad, but I wasn't sure how. Part of me didn't even want to hear his side of the story. I was too angry, too hurt. When I got to his house, he was sitting in the living room, reading the newspaper like it was any other day. He looked up when I walked in, his expression unreadable. "Jason," he said, setting the paper down. "What's wrong?" "I just spoke to Amanda," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "She told me everything." Dad didn't flinch. He just nodded slowly, as if he'd been expecting this. "I see. That's all you have to say?" I snapped. "You paid her to leave me? You threatened her career? Do you have any idea what that did to me?" "Jason, calm down," he said, his tone infuriatingly calm. "I did what I thought was best for you." "Best for me?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You destroyed my marriage. How the hell is that what's best for me?" "You were wasting your potential," Dad said firmly. "Amanda wasn't the right partner for you. She was holding you back." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So you decided to play God with my life? Who gave you the right?" "I'm your father," he said simply, "and I know you better than you know yourself." His arrogance was staggering. I wanted to scream, to hit something, but I forced myself to stay calm. "You had no right to interfere in my life like that."
None.
"I'm sorry you feel that way," he said, his tone dismissive. "But I stand by my decision." I left without another word, feeling more betrayed than I ever had in my life. My father had crossed a line I didn't even know existed, and I wasn't sure I could ever forgive him. After my confrontation with Dad, I couldn't sleep. My thoughts kept circling back to what Amanda had said about the payment and the threats. I didn't want to believe my father was capable of something so manipulative, but the way he had reacted, so unapologetic and firm, left little doubt. Still, I needed proof, something tangible to confirm what I'd been told. The opportunity came a few days later. I was at Dad's house again, this time under the guise of helping him sort through some old paperwork. He was planning to reorganize the attic, and I volunteered, partly to keep an eye on him and partly because I hoped I might find something to explain all of this. The attic was a mess, filled with boxes of old tax documents, family photos, and memorabilia from his younger days. I tried to stay focused on the task at hand, but my mind was racing. Somewhere in this house, there had to be evidence of the deal Amanda mentioned. After hours of sorting through dusty papers, I was about to give up when I stumbled upon a locked filing cabinet in the corner of the attic. The key was nowhere in sight, but the lock itself looked old and fragile. I hesitated for a moment before deciding to force it open. A quick search through Dad's toolbox downstairs yielded a flathead screwdriver, which I used to pop the lock. Inside the cabinet, I found folders meticulously labeled in my father's precise handwriting. Most of them contained nothing unusual: financial records, legal documents, and investment plans. But one folder, labeled Confidential Agreements, caught my eye. I opened it and immediately froze. The first document was titled Settlement Agreement, Amanda Monroe. My hands shook as I read through it. The agreement outlined the terms of a payment made to Amanda: $750,000 in exchange for her agreement to file for divorce, leave without requesting alimony, and adhere to a strict non-disclosure clause. It also explicitly mentioned the threats against her career if she refused. The next document was even more shocking. It was a letter from my father to a man named Gerald Winston, the CEO of a major real estate development company. The letter discussed a proposal for an arranged marriage between me and Gerald's daughter, Victoria Winston, as a way to solidify a business alliance. I couldn't believe what I was reading. My father had not only sabotaged my marriage, but had also planned my future without my knowledge or consent. The final document in the folder was a timeline detailing his strategy. It included notes about Amanda's supposed weaknesses, suggestions for how to approach her, and even contingencies in case she refused to cooperate. There was also a section titled Next Steps, which outlined plans to introduce me to Victoria during a charity gala later that year. My anger boiled over as I processed what I was seeing. This wasn't just interference. This was a meticulously planned betrayal. I left the attic, clutching the documents, and stormed downstairs. Dad was in the living room, reading a book. He looked up as I entered, and his expression shifted when he saw the folder in my hands. "Jason," he said slowly, setting the book aside. "What are you doing with that? What the hell is this?" I demanded, holding up the folder. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I told you, Jason. I did what I thought was best for you." "Best for me?" I shouted. "You blackmailed my wife, paid her off to leave me, and then tried to sell me off like some pawn in a business deal. How the hell is that best for me?" "Calm down," he said, his voice firm but calm. "You're overreacting." "Overreacting?" I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "You destroyed my life, Dad. Do you have any idea what I've been through because of you?" He stood up, meeting my glare. "Jason, you were wasting your potential. Amanda was a distraction. You could never have achieved the things you're capable of with her holding you back." "Achieved what?" I snapped. "Whatever you wanted. A partnership with Gerald Winston? A marriage to his daughter? Did you even care what I wanted?" "You don't know what you want," he said coldly. "You've never known. That's why I had to step in." I couldn't listen to him anymore. I turned and walked out of the house, the folder still in my hand. Over the next few days, I didn't know what to do. I felt like my entire world had been turned upside down. My father, the man I'd looked up to for most of my life, had betrayed me in ways I couldn't even begin to comprehend. I showed the documents to Kate, who was just as horrified as I was. "This is insane," she said, flipping through the papers. "How could Dad do this to you?" "I don't know," I said, my voice hollow. "But I can't let him get away with it." Kate hesitated. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But one thing's for sure. I'm done with him. He's out of my life." For the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly on my own. But as painful as it was, I knew I couldn't let my father's betrayal define me. I had to move forward, even if it meant leaving everything behind. When I revealed the documents to the rest of my family, the fallout was immediate and brutal. I called a family meeting at Kate's house, not knowing what to expect but certain everyone needed to hear the truth. I laid the documents on the dining room table and watched as my family absorbed the magnitude of what our father had done. Kate and I had already discussed it extensively, but even she seemed shaken seeing the papers laid out in black and white. Bethany, my 34-year-old sister who lived out of state, had flown in for this meeting. She was sitting across from me, her face pale as she read through the settlement agreement and the letter to Gerald Winston. "This is insane," she said, looking up at me. "I can't believe he would do something like this." "You and me both," I replied grimly. Our younger brother, Ryan, who had always been Dad's golden boy, was sitting in the corner with his arms crossed. He hadn't said much since the meeting began, but I could tell from his expression that he wasn't convinced. "This doesn't prove anything," Ryan finally said, his tone defensive. "Maybe Dad made some mistakes, But he was trying to help you, Jason. You've always been so stubborn about listening to him. Trying to help me? I repeated, my voice rising. He destroyed my marriage, Ryan. He blackmailed Amanda, paid her off, and tried to arrange a marriage for me like I'm some kind of chess piece. How is that helping? Ryan shrugged, his jaw tight. Amanda wasn't good for you. Maybe Dad was right. Bethany slammed her hand on the table, startling everyone. Are you serious, Ryan? You're defending him? He manipulated Jason's entire life. How can you be okay with that? I'm not saying I agree with everything he did, Ryan said, his voice growing louder. But Dad's always done what's best for this family. Maybe Jason should be grateful. Grateful? Kate interjected, her voice sharp. For having his life torn apart? For being lied to and controlled? Ryan, how can you even say that? The argument quickly escalated, with Bethany and Kate on one side and Ryan staunchly defending Dad. My Uncle Frank, who had been sitting quietly at the end of the table, finally spoke up. Everyone calm down, he said, his voice firm but calm. This isn't helping. Frank, you've known Dad longer than any of us, I said, turning to him. What do you think about all this? Frank sighed, rubbing his temples. Henry has always been intense, he said carefully. He believes in control, in making sure everything is perfect. But this is beyond anything I ever imagined. So you're on Jason's side? Bethany asked. I'm not taking sides, Frank said. But I do think Henry needs to answer for what he's done. Ryan scoffed. Of course you'd say that. You've always been jealous of Dad's success. Frank's eyes narrowed. Watch it, Ryan. This isn't about me. The tension in the room was unbearable. I could feel the family fracturing in real time, splitting into factions with me, Kate, and Bethany on one side and Ryan and a few of Dad's older siblings, Uncle Charles and Aunt Lorraine, on the other. Aunt Lorraine, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. Jason, I understand why you're upset, she said, her tone measured. But your father has always had the family's best interests at heart. Maybe he went too far, but he was trying to protect you. Protect me from what? I asked, my voice laced with disbelief. From failure, she said simply. From making the wrong choices. Henry has always believed in pushing his children to be the best they can be. At what cost? Kate demanded. This isn't pushing someone. This is control, manipulation, abuse. Lorraine shook her head, clearly unimpressed. You're being dramatic. Bethany stood up, her face red with anger. This is pointless. If you can look at those documents and still defend Dad, then there's no reasoning with you. The meeting ended in chaos. Half the family stormed out, while the rest stayed behind to console me and try to make sense of what had happened. Bethany was livid, pacing back and forth in the living room while Kate tried to calm her down. This is tearing us apart, I said, sinking into the couch. It's not your fault, Bethany said firmly. Dad is the one who did this, not you. Over the next few weeks, the divide in our family only deepened. Ryan stopped speaking to me entirely, and he and Dad seemed to grow even closer, as if they were banding together against the rest of us. Aunt Lorraine and Uncle Charles sent me a condescending email, essentially telling me to forgive and forget. But Kate and Bethany were my rock. They stood by me through everything, helping me figure out how to move forward. Frank, too, was supportive, though he tried to stay neutral to avoid further inflaming the situation. The worst part was seeing how the conflict affected my nieces and nephews. Kate's kids, who were close to Ryan's, started asking why they couldn't visit their cousins anymore. The rift wasn't just hurting the adults, it was trickling down to the next generation. I knew things would never be the same. My relationship with Dad was beyond repair, and the family I once leaned on was now irreparably divided. After the chaos of the family meeting, I realized I couldn't let what my father did go unanswered. The betrayal was bad enough, but the longer I thought about it, the more I realized how much damage his actions had caused, not just to me, but to Amanda and potentially even to his business. I decided to take action, and to my surprise, Amanda was on board. I know I made mistakes, Amanda told me when I called her, but your father forced my hand. If you're serious about holding him accountable, I'll help. Her willingness to cooperate gave me the courage to move forward. Together, we reached out to a lawyer, Allison Harper, who came highly recommended. She specialized in cases involving coercion, defamation, and financial misconduct, and after hearing our story, she was eager to take the case. "This is one of the most egregious abuses of power I've ever seen," Allison said during our first meeting. "If we can prove what you're telling me, Henry could be in serious legal trouble." The first step was gathering evidence. Amanda handed over her copy of the settlement agreement and other correspondence she'd kept from the divorce. I provided the documents I'd found in my father's attic, along with a detailed timeline of events. Allison also suggested we look into my father's business records to see if he had misused company funds to pay Amanda or further his schemes. This is where things got tricky. My father's company, Sterling Ventures, was a privately held real estate firm with a reputation for secrecy. Allison brought in a forensic accountant, Daniel Price, to help us uncover any financial irregularities. Daniel was sharp and meticulous, and within a few weeks, he found something significant: a payment of $750,000 that had been disguised as a consulting fee in the company's records. "This is the smoking gun," Daniel told us during a strategy session. "This payment matches the amount Amanda received, and there's no legitimate consulting work associated with it. It's clearly a misuse of company funds." The discovery strengthened our case, but it also raised the stakes. If my father found out we were investigating him, he would do everything in his power to stop us. Sure enough, it didn't take long for him to catch wind of our plans. I was at home one evening when my phone rang. It was Ryan. "What the hell are you doing?" he demanded as soon as I picked up. "Dad told me you're trying to sue him. Have you lost your mind?" "I'm holding him accountable," I said firmly. "He crossed every line imaginable, and he needs to face the consequences." "You're going to destroy this family," Ryan snapped. "Do you even care about that?" "Dad destroyed this family," I shot back. "I'm just trying to make things right." Ryan hung up on me, but I knew this was just the beginning. Within days, I started receiving calls from other family members, some pleading with me to drop the case, others accusing me of being ungrateful. Aunt Lorraine even showed up at my door, clutching a folder of documents she claimed would exonerate my father. "Jason, you're making a mistake," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Henry has done so much for this family. You can't turn on him like this." "I'm not turning on him," I replied, my patience wearing thin. "I'm standing up to him. There's a difference." The pressure from my family was overwhelming, but Amanda and Allison kept me focused. Amanda, in particular, surprised me with her resilience. She had every reason to walk away from this mess, but she stayed, determined to see it through. "I've lived with the guilt of what your father made me do for too long," she told me one day after a meeting with Allison. "This is my chance to make things right." The legal battle escalated quickly. Allison filed a lawsuit against my father, accusing him of coercion, defamation, and misuse of business funds. The news made headlines almost immediately, and my father's once sterling reputation began to crumble. Henry, of course, fought back with everything he had. He hired a team of high-powered lawyers who tried to discredit me and Amanda, painting us as bitter and vengeful. They even dug into Amanda's past, bringing up old mistakes to undermine her credibility. But Allison was relentless. She deposed my father and his closest associates, uncovering more evidence of his schemes. One of the most damning pieces of testimony came from a former employee of Sterling Ventures, a woman named Rachel Klein. Rachel had worked as my father's executive assistant for over a decade, and she knew all of his secrets. "Henry Sterling is a master manipulator," Rachel said during her deposition. "He controls everyone around him, and he's not above breaking the law to get what he wants." Rachel provided detailed accounts of meetings where my father had discussed his plans to pay off Amanda and arrange my future marriage to Victoria Winston. Her testimony was a turning point in the case, solidifying the picture of my father as a man who would stop at nothing to maintain control. As the trial date approached, my father's legal team tried one last tactic. They offered me a settlement. The terms were generous, enough money to set me up for life, along with a written apology from my father. But there was a catch. I would have to drop the lawsuit and sign a non-disclosure agreement, ensuring that none of the details ever became public. I wrestled with the decision for days. The money was tempting, and part of me wanted to take it just to put this nightmare behind me. But in the end, I couldn't do it. Accepting the settlement would mean letting my father off the hook, and I couldn't live with myself if I did that. When I informed Allison of my decision, she smiled. "You're doing the right thing, Jason. It won't be easy, but justice rarely is." The trial was grueling. My father's lawyers pulled out all the stops, attacking me and Amanda at every turn. But Allison was prepared for everything they threw at us. She presented the evidence clearly and convincingly, painting a damning picture of my father's actions. The jury deliberated for 2 days before reaching a verdict. When the foreman read the decision in our favor, I felt a wave of relief and vindication wash over me. My father was ordered to pay damages, and his misuse of company funds sparked an investigation by the SEC, further tarnishing his reputation. After the trial, everything changed. My father, Henry, once a towering figure in the world of real estate and in our family, began to unravel. The court's decision had exposed his manipulative schemes, and his carefully curated reputation crumbled. For years, he had wielded his influence like a weapon, bending people to his will with a mix of charm, intimidation, and power. But now, at 64, his empire was falling apart. The first major blow came when Sterling Ventures faced an SEC investigation. The misappropriation of funds used to pay Amanda had triggered a deep dive into the company's finances. Within weeks, investigators uncovered a pattern of questionable transactions. It turned out that the $750,000 payment was just the tip of the iceberg. Henry had been funneling company money into personal ventures for years, hiding his tracks with fake invoices and shell companies. The news made headlines, and clients began pulling out of deals. Longtime partners distanced themselves from Sterling Ventures, and the company's stock value plummeted. Employees started resigning en masse, unwilling to go down with the sinking ship. One of the most shocking departures was Victor Ramirez, the company's COO and one of my father's closest allies. Victor had been with Sterling Ventures for over 20 years, and for most of that time, he had been fiercely loyal to my father. But when the investigation began, Victor turned whistleblower, providing evidence to the SEC in exchange for leniency. "I can't protect you anymore, Henry," Victor reportedly told my father during a tense phone call. "You brought this on yourself." Victor's betrayal was a gut punch to my father, but it was only the beginning. As the SEC investigation deepened, more of his inner circle began to abandon him. The board of directors held an emergency meeting and voted to remove him as CEO. For the first time in decades, Henry was no longer in control of the company he had built from the ground up. At home, things were just as bad. The rift in our family had grown wider in the aftermath of the trial. Kate and Bethany had completely cut ties with him, and even Ryan, his most loyal defender, began to waver. The financial fallout from the lawsuit meant that my father could no longer support Ryan's lavish lifestyle, and the strain began to show. "I never thought I'd see the day when Dad wasn't the one calling the shots," Ryan admitted to me during a rare phone call. "It's like he's not even the same person anymore." I didn't feel sorry for my father, but I couldn't ignore the reality of his situation. He was a man who had always defined himself by his power and control, and now he had neither. His fall from grace was swift and brutal, and it left him isolated and vulnerable. One of the most poignant moments came when I visited his estate to retrieve some old family heirlooms. The once pristine property was in disarray, with overgrown lawns and peeling paint on the shutters. Inside, I found my father sitting alone in his study, surrounded by stacks of unopened mail and empty whiskey bottles. He looked up when I entered, his eyes bloodshot and weary. "Jason," he said, his voice hoarse, "what are you doing here?" "I came to get Mom's photo albums," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Bethany wanted them." He nodded, slumping back in his chair. For a moment, we sat in silence, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. "Is this what you wanted?" he finally asked, gesturing around the room. "To see me like this?" "This isn't about what I wanted," I replied. "It's about accountability. You hurt a lot of people, Dad. This is the result." He didn't argue, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of regret in his eyes. But it wasn't enough to erase the damage he had done. As word of his downfall spread, my father became a pariah in the business world. Invitations to high-profile events dried up, and former friends stopped returning his calls. Even Gerald Winston, the man he had once tried to align our family with, publicly denounced him. Henry Sterling's actions were not only unethical but deeply disappointing, Winston said in an interview. I have no affiliation with him or his company. The ultimate humiliation came when my father was forced to sell the family estate to cover his mounting legal bills. The house, which had been in our family for generations, was auctioned off to strangers. Watching the estate slip away was a bitter pill for all of us, but for my father, it was the final nail in the coffin of his legacy. By the end of the year, Henry was living in a modest apartment on the outskirts of town. He spent most of his days alone, avoiding calls from creditors and reporters. The man who had once been larger than life was now a shadow of his former self. Despite everything, there were moments when I wondered if it had to end this way. I thought about reaching out to him, offering some kind of olive branch, but every time I considered it, I remembered the pain he had caused, the lies, the manipulation, the betrayal. In the end, my father's downfall was a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition and the cost of valuing power over relationships. He had spent his life building an empire, only to watch it crumble because he couldn't see the damage he was causing to the people around him. For me, Kate, Bethany, and the rest of the family, his loss of influence was bittersweet. It was a relief to be free from his control, but it was also a reminder of how much we had lost along the way. After everything that happened, the trial, the revelations, the family fracturing, life felt like a minefield I had to navigate cautiously. I thought I would feel triumphant after the legal victory, but instead, I felt exhausted and empty. The wreckage of my father's actions still loomed large, and the relationships I'd once cherished felt irreparably damaged. Amanda and I hadn't spoken much since the trial ended. We had been allies out of necessity, but the shared pain and history between us made it hard to move forward. Still, something kept pulling me toward her. Perhaps a need to find closure, or maybe even a chance to make sense of the chaos we had endured. It started with a text. "Hey Jason, can we talk? There's something I need to say." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "Sure. When?" We agreed to meet at a small cafe downtown, one that had been our favorite during our marriage. The irony wasn't lost on me as I walked through the door and saw her sitting at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. She looked nervous, her posture stiff and her eyes darting around the room. "Hey," I said as I sat down. "Hi," she replied softly. For a moment, we just sat there, the weight of unspoken words filling the space between us. Finally, Amanda broke the silence. "I wanted to say thank you," she began, "for standing up to your father, for fighting for what was right." I nodded, unsure of how to respond. "I couldn't have done it without you," I admitted. "You were braver than I ever gave you credit for." She smiled faintly. "It wasn't bravery, Jason. It was guilt. I've carried so much of it since the divorce. Knowing what I did, how I hurt you. I needed to make it right." "You did," I said firmly. "We both made mistakes, but what Dad did wasn't your fault. He manipulated both of us." We talked for hours that day, unraveling the tangled web of our past. Amanda shared things I hadn't known about her struggles during our marriage, the pressure she had felt to be perfect, the way my father's criticisms had chipped away at her confidence. In turn, I told her about the resentment I had harbored, not just toward her, but toward myself for not seeing the cracks in our relationship sooner. For the first time in years, we were honest with each other. And in that honesty, we found something unexpected: forgiveness. It didn't happen all at once, but over the next few months, Amanda and I began to rebuild a tentative friendship. We weren't the same people we had been during our marriage, and that turned out to be a good thing. The distance we had both needed to grow as individuals also gave us the perspective to see each other more clearly. Meanwhile, I was working hard to create a new life for myself. With the lawsuit behind me, I decided to leave the corporate world and pursue something I was truly passionate about: opening a community art center. Art had always been my escape during tough times, and I wanted to create a space where others could find that same solace. The process was daunting, finding a location, securing funding, and navigating endless permits. But it was also the most fulfilling thing I had ever done. Kate and Bethany were incredibly supportive, helping me with everything from brainstorming ideas to painting walls in the new space. Even Amanda pitched in, using her marketing skills to help me promote the center. During this time, Amanda also began to rebuild her life. She started a new job at a nonprofit organization focused on providing resources for women in crisis. The work was deeply personal for her, and she poured her heart into it. Watching her thrive in this new role made me realize how much she had changed and how much I had underestimated her before. One evening, after a long day at the art center, Amanda stopped by with takeout. We sat on the floor of the nearly finished gallery, eating noodles out of cartons and talking about everything from work to our favorite childhood memories. "I never thought we'd be here," I said, gesturing around the room. "Me neither," she admitted. "But I'm glad we are." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw someone I admired. Not just for her resilience, but for her ability to grow and find meaning in the aftermath of so much pain. As the months turned into a year, Amanda and I settled into a comfortable rhythm. We weren't trying to rekindle our romance, but we had found something just as valuable: mutual respect and support. It was a foundation for something new, free from the toxicity that had defined so much of our past. The opening of the art center was a turning point for me. The community showed up in droves, and the joy on their faces made all the hard work worthwhile. Amanda stood by my side during the ribbon-cutting ceremony, cheering me on as I took this new step forward. Later that night, as we cleaned up after the event, she turned to me with a smile. "You found your purpose, Jason. I can see it in your eyes." "Thanks to you," I said, meaning it. She shook her head. "No, this was always in you. You just needed the space to find it." Our lives weren't perfect, but they were ours. We had both broken free from my father's shadow, carving out paths that felt authentic and true. And while the scars of the past would always remain, they no longer defined us. For the first time in years, I felt hopeful, not just for myself, but for Amanda, for my family, and for the future we were all building, one step at a time.